Okay, this is a video about how banks create... No, not how banks. This is a video about what's really happening in the British UK economy. It also explains a lot about why Brexit occurred, where to start, and who your government really works for. Now, where to start? Money. Let's talk about a bit about money. Yeah. You probably don't know, but banks, the main, the big banks, the big five, they're the ones that really create about 97.4% or something like that of all the money in circulation. They create it. The banks themselves create money, and the way they do this is they make loans. Every time they make a loan, if you go to a bank and ask for a loan for 10 grand, they will just key in the numbers 10 grand to your bank account and put it down as an asset, that, like, because you sign a contract which says that you owe the bank 10 grand. Now, this money, you can go to your bank then, you've keyed it in, and you can draw it out and start spending it. But you have to pay the money back in instalments, and you also pay interest, and that's what creates the bank's profit, right? So the money didn't exist, the bank created it, you took it out, the bank created real money by typing figures into a screen, you took it out, you spent it, and it goes off elsewhere, and then the banks charge you interest, right? But there's a problem with the way that banks are creating money, because basically, if you ask them for a loan in order to create money, yeah, you might say, oh, I want a loan for a car, oh, I want a loan for a house, or a mortgage for a house, or I want a loan for this business making, I don't know, dog suits, right? And the bank will say, well, we don't think this dog suits idea has got much chance of success, or we don't think this internet company that you say that you're going to develop has got chance of success. So what they'll do is, but they might say, oh, you can afford to pay back a mortgage, we'll give you a mortgage. And then the next guy goes and says, can I have a car loan? And they'll say, okay, we'll give you a car loan because you can, you've got a house and you earn a decent wage, so we're liable to get it back, so we'll give you, so they'll create money for the car loan, they'll create money for the mortgage. And another guy will come and they'll throw money at him for the mortgage, more for the mortgage. So what happens is, although money is being created, it's being diverted to the markets that the bank managers decide it's good for, right? And over the past, let's say, 30 years or whatever, the banks have been throwing money. They've decided that they want to throw money at houses, mortgages, rather than other businesses. So what you've seen happen is that the property market, because it's got so much money thrown at it, all new money created by the banks, all new money, yeah, has been thrown into property. So the property's expanded, property bubble, it's expanded way above the lines of inflation. So you might, 20 years ago, you might have got a flat in London for, let's say, 80 grand, yeah, and now that same flat in London will cost £700,000. But if you look at inflation, it says that the cost of inflation has only been, let's say, 5% a year over 20 years, which really would put that house at being worth, from 80 grand, at 5% inflation, just a rough guess, 200 grand. Yeah, but it's not 200 grand, it's 700 grand. It's exceeded all inflationary growth, right? And that's only because the bank have thrown money at it and created this bubble. Anything that runs away like that in price is because it's the bank's doing, right? And the sad part of it is there's inflationary indexes. I think there's the CPI and the RPI, Consumer Price Index, and somewhat else index. And the CPI doesn't even include council tax, mortgages, real estate, doesn't include any of that. So it's not, when you look at these figures for inflation and your wage gets raised by inflation, let's say they raise your wage by inflation, it's not real true, raised by true inflation. It's because true inflation, the inflation figures that they use, and your pensions, are all related to CPI, which doesn't include house prices and hence rent and things like that, mortgage prices, or council tax. It's not included, it's excluded. So the government works in mysterious ways, right? So the bottom line of it is, it's wrong that the banks themselves who create the money decide exactly where that money goes in our economy. So the guys who make the money decide where it goes in our economy, and they're not interested in putting it into, let's say, high risk projects, because if some guy says, listen, I need £100,000, I'm working on a artificial intelligence project, and they might think, well, this might not succeed, I don't want to give him that 100 grand or that £1,000,000 for it. They'd rather give you that £100 or £1,000,000 for real estate, because if you don't succeed with the real estate and you stop paying them back, then they've got the house which they can then take off you, foreclose on you, take the house off you, sell it and make back a lot of that money that they created. They can make it back rather than have to carry the can. So, but if you had, let's say, a proper, fair economist, or let's call it a mother, the mother would say, well, I think we should put invest money in schools, into housing, into hospitals, into businesses. We need to make this local area, I know the city's doing well, but we need to make Moss Side in Manchester do well. We need to invest in Moss Side, or we need to invest in Coventry. You know what I mean? We don't want to invest in just mortgages, we want to invest in building up Coventry. So the mother, if the mother was the bank manager, she would invest in projects that might bring Coventry up, rather than just mortgages, right? And Coventry would expand. Wherever you throw the money, it's gonna grow. So this is how money is created and distributed through the environment, through the economy, and so through the UK, right? So it's not necessarily a really good thing, because the banks throw all the money at mortgages, and look what happened. Subprime mortgages came about, yeah. People who most definitely couldn't afford to pay subprime mortgages back, they bought houses when they couldn't afford them. Next thing, they packaged all these mortgages up and sold them to the highest bidder, different banks and investments, hedge funds and things like that. And then when the people started defaulting on all their loans, because they couldn't afford it in the first place, because that's where the banks had thrown the money, the house prices rocketed up, but the people started defaulting on all the loans, which would have taken down the banks. And if the banks go down, trust me, it's a bad thing for the entire economy and world. It'll probably cause panic and bring all the banks down, and then the whole world is going to be in a load of shit. So what they do is they say, okay, what we'll do quantitative easing. And what that means is that the central bank, like the Bank of England, will just start giving each of the banks, the major banks, big pots of money so that they can afford to pay their overheads and balance their books at the end of the day. So that's what quantitative easing is. And they don't have to pay this quantitative easing back. These banks that we've rescued, they don't have to pay this quantitative easing money back. We pay it back out of our taxes. That's what quantitative easing is. Normally the banks have a certain amount of reserve cash, yeah, reserve money. It's not actually notes, it's just figures in a number screen. Each bank has a certain amount of reserve money. And what happens is, at the end of the day, Mick buys a car and Sharon deposits 10 grand and blah 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 from this bank and that bank, and all the transactions happen in the day and they settle at night, and at the end of the night, Bank A might owe Bank B £1,000,000, Bank C might owe Bank A £750,000, and Bank etc. And so Bank C will look in its reserve currency, and it will say, okay, I've only got 500,000. I need to borrow some money to make my payment to Bank A. But what will happen is, Bank C will go to Bank B and say, can you lend me that 250,000 for Bank A? And Bank C will say, okay, I've got a lot of money, because Bank A just paid it £1,000,000. So it'll take that money and it will lend it to Bank B, and Bank B will pay Bank A, and everyone's happy. But imagine Bank B knew that Imagine Bank B was in a very bad situation and everybody knew about it in the industry. Then Bank C wouldn't want to lend to Bank B. And so when it came to balancing its books, it'd be insolvent, it wouldn't be able to balance its books. So the way to stop that happening is for the main bank, which is the Bank of England, to give Bank B not 250,000, let's say 10 million. Just give it to it in reserves to add to its reserves. So now Bank B can pay Bank A, Bank C can pay Bank A, yeah, and no one's going to worry. And that's called quantitative easing. But that 10 million the Bank of England gave to Bank B or C, whatever, it doesn't really matter. That has to be paid for by the public. That's what quantitative easing is. Right, so they do stuff like that. So the banks are responsible for directing the course of money through our industries, and sorting out each other banks when they need money, etc., etc., and setting policy. Now, the sad part is, the Bank of England is actually part of the city, the square mile in London. It's just 1 square mile. It's the City of London, right? Now, this City of London isn't under normal regulation and the normal rules of the land. You see, it's kind of like an independent entity. Okay, if you murder someone on the streets of the City of London, you're going to be judged and taken to court just by normal UK law. But there's other laws, particularly to do with finance and the way they handle their affairs, that actually are separate from the rest of the UK. They're like an independent state within a state, yeah? And the City of London, like Westminster has MPs from every borough or county in the UK. Well, the City of London, and they get voted for by the people, etc. And then they go to Parliament and they act as your Member of Parliament. Well, this doesn't happen in the city. The city is run by something called, what's it called? The Corporation of London. It's run by the Corporation of London. And what this Corporation of London, which is a governing body for the City of London, it's basically a body that's voted in not just by the people who live there, because there's only like 4,000 people that live in the city. The people that get the votes in the city in order to pick who's the council representatives are banks and financial institutions, yeah? So they get to pick who's in charge and running the city. And they vote. The city's made up of about 25 wards, different sections, like Cheap, one of them's called, Aldgate, Bishopsgate, there's 25 of them anyway. Some really wonderful names, and like I think there's no, what is it now? I'm sorry, I want to think about this. I'm going to take a little bit of time to think about it. Farringdon. There's Farringdon Inner Farringdon, or Farringdon Inner, and Farringdon Without. Farringdon Within and Farringdon Without. And there's loads more, right? And all these people, all these wards, they have aldermen. This is all ancient medieval stuff. They have aldermen. They have like an alderman in charge, and they also have livery or liverymen or something like that. And they have whereas the rest of London is governed by the London Mayor, they have a Lord Mayor, which is totally in charge of governing the city. He doesn't really do much, but he's in charge of governing the city, and he's picked by the aldermen. So it's got a whole new government system, and the people who vote for all the councillors, etc., and aldermen in the city are predominantly the banks, law firms and accounting firms, the financial institutions. They get selected number of votes depending on how many staff they have on their books, right? And not only that, but the city has a guy called what's it called now? Remembrancer. And the Remembrancer, he's the lobbyists in government who go to the Houses of Parliament. They stay in the lobby and they whisper stuff into the MPs' ears, about what they want to discuss and rules they want changing and things like that. They have discussions and debates and things like that with the MPs in Parliament, but they're only allowed in the lobby. Well, the remembrancer is like a lobbyist who's got a seat, an unelected person in Parliament that's got an actual seat in there. So he sits in there and gets all the relevant information, all what's going down, all the documents and notes and memos that are going around. And Andy can wander around and start whispering in people's ears about what the city wants or what the city doesn't like. Andy can take all that information back to the city and get them to discuss it and implement changes. The city controls finance, period, right? And what's happened over the past few years is the city, through its control over finance, has changed Britain via its MPs into rather than a state of industrial state of manufacturing and things like that. We're now becoming a lot of our gross domestic product is coming from finance, and they've guided it this way, right? And many years ago, the city was basically just it ran or governed all the finances and stuff for Imperial Britain. But when Britain's imperialist countries all started disappearing, etc., and getting taken back, the city started losing its financial power in the world. When imperialism went down, the city went down. But then what happened is, I think it was after there was a couple of reasons, but one of them was the Vietnam War. No, not the Vietnam War. One of the reasons was Russian oligarchs decided, with the Cold War, Russian oligarchs decided that they wanted to still trade their American dollars, etc., but they were scared of putting it into American banks because of the Cold War, the Americans might just freeze and seize all their money. So what they did is the Bank of England established what's called a Eurodollar market in London, and then all the rich Russians and all that jazz could start putting all their dollars into England and start doing transactions with other people and companies and that around the world through their English accounts, right? And this business wasn't regulated at all, so all these transactions that were going on with millions and billions of dollars, right, that started in London, they weren't regulated by London. It was just allowed to happen. And so then started growing like an offshore market for people around the world. People soon clocked this and decided that they could set these facilities up in other British, the same exact setup. You could set it up in other British offshore territories and crown dependencies. I think we've got 3 crown dependencies, which are Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man, and we've got about 14 offshore territories, including places like the Cayman Islands, the Virgin Islands, and there's a lot more like British Antarctica and region and things like that, and Indian Antarctica regions. But forget about them. What matters is that other banks and all that started setting themselves up an outfit in different locations around the world, and this offshore business started to sprout up. Well, recently what's happened is the offshore business is now probably, the offshore businesses around the world probably own about $57 trillion are held in offshore accounts, and Britain, London, is the main central hub of all of that. Now, that money in offshore accounts is everything. It's drug money, it's armament sales, armament money, it's people who want to avoid tax, yeah, it's very wealthy individuals' accounts, it's kickbacks accounts for like government bodies and people like that. What else could it be? You name it. It's legitimate money, some of it, a lot of it, but most of it is dodgy money from around the world, because it has to go somewhere. All these dodgy American dollars and stuff, they have to get put somewhere. When a country, let's say Colombia, makes £30 billion this year off cocaine, that's not going to be stuffed under mattresses. It's going to end up via Britain, via British offshore companies in bank accounts. Yeah. And the other thing is, actually, America and Britain encourage this. They do encourage this. Because America and Britain, in America in particular, no, not America, in UK in particular, have you ever seen a bank manager or a bank guy go to prison? No, it doesn't happen. You're never going to go to prison if you're involved in banking, no matter how dodgy the transactions are. You will never go to prison in Britain, and that gives the offshore community, the drug dealers and cartels and warmongers, it gives them confidence. Britain's a good place to put your money because they're never going to freeze your account and they're never going to send you to prison, right? And you can, as long as you can make pathways and instruments and accounts and trusts and foundations abroad that are secure, you do it properly, you will never get done for it. You can start using that money to invest in real estate around the world, real estate in London. You know what I mean? So it's like well dodgy. An offshore business creates money for our companies abroad because they charge it stock. You can't just open an offshore company and have some accountants manage your trust fund for nothing. You're paying thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands, millions even if it's big enough. So the country of Britain makes a hell of a lot of money from storing all this cash, and then they can use it for their own means. They can start doing foreign exchange and start doing trades and getting involved with investments of their own accords using this money, this dodgy money. So dodgy money is a massive part of the British economy, a massive part. You can even balance your let's say the pound's going down, GBP USD is going down in price or up in price. You can use that money, you can start bringing that money abroad, onshore, to Britain or to America, yeah, and throw it into the pot, and it starts getting passed around and used so that the dollar, let's say, isn't as scarce as it was before you brought that drug money in, that 500 billion of drug money in. The dollar was kind of scarce. No, let's not say 500, 10 billion or 20 billion of drug money. The dollar was like going too high, so you can inject this 20 billion into the market using trades or whatever, and then the dollar will come back down. You can use this dodgy money to manipulate the price of your foreign exchange. When dollars are scarce, you bring it in. You know what I mean? When dollars are in supply, loads of them, you shell it back out, and you can keep your currency at a nice steady rate, which cons the people of the country as to what's really going on in the economy. Right? What else can I talk about? Money laundering. Yeah, money laundering. Right? So, the British people are the most corrupt people on the planet, the British bankers, accountants, law firms. Right? And what they do is, it's like, now, they've got a project, let's say, called HS2 and Crossrail, right? You would probably think that money for HS2 and Crossrail comes from the government, but it doesn't. It doesn't at all, right? That money for HS2 and Crossrail, where it comes from is something called a PFI, Private Financial Investment Company, right? And what it really means is that a lot of the times these aren't even put out to tender, but Britain wants to build a road, or HS2. Britain wants to build HS2, right? So what will happen is these PFIs companies will decide how much it's going to cost to build HS2. So let's say it's going to cost 50 billion, yeah? So what they do is they put into the government that we can do that build for HS2 for 50 billion, yeah? This is how much it's going to cost, but you're going to need 50 billion pounds worth of loans. And the government's people say, oh, all right then, that sounds good. And even if someone comes in with a lower bid at 49 billion, then the PFI company would say we can do it for 48.5 billion. They're going lower, so they get the deal, yeah? But what happens is the government sign up to a contract. And what the contract states is you will pay back this 49.5 billion regardless over 25 years, right? And that doesn't get shown in the British balance book. So they've got 49 billion, and the only thing that will show out of that 49 billion is the interest paid on it. Yeah? And the rest, and in the meantime, the Tory party gets HS2 built, and everyone says, yeah, look at what the Tories have done. They built us HS2. They built us a real HS2 and Crossrail. They built us massive, phenomenal, brand spanking new transport links. Yeah, everyone's pleased. But the reality of the situation is, they start HS2. Once it starts, it cannot stop under any circumstance, because what you don't know is that the government has signed an agreement to pay for HS2 over the next 25 or 30 years. It's in stone. Even if they pulled out of HS2 last year, they still have to pay the cost of HS2 to these PFI companies, right? But not only that, but the cost of HS2, the contract what they decided in order to build HS2 has a lot of grey areas. So they say it costs 50 billion, yeah, but they didn't mention. But these grey areas have now opened up now that the construction started. These grey areas have now opened up. So they say they might have put a grey area might be something like we've included inflation or workers' wages to be this price, or else we think materials are going to be that price, or this duration should be done by that time, right? But when it starts to build, due to, say, COVID, yeah, that's a good thing, right? The thing's going to be delayed. The workers were sick, so they're going to have to employ extra labour, whatever. But basically, the price is going up. So the £50 billion that they agreed to initially has now changed to about 150 billion. By the end of the project, with all these grey areas are sorted out, it's changed to 150 billion. And regardless of anything, these PFI companies that sorted it out, the 150 billion, have to be paid back. Yeah, the government has said we will pay you, guaranteed, right? So they've inflated the fees to 150 billion by the grey areas, and not only that, they have to be and will be paid back fully, right? So what happens then is, if you sat down and tallied up what's actually going on, you'd find out that we've took 150 billion out, but we actually pay back over the 25-year, our kids and ourselves, over a 25-year period, we pay back about 1.6 trillion. 7 times the amount. Well, 700, let's call it a trillion. We pay back $1 trillion for HS2 and Crossrail. Right? Now this trillion, why do we pay this trillion? Because the company, the PFI company, got the money from offshore investors, right? Who charged the PFI company massive interest rates, like 15%. Whereas the government could have got an interest rate lower than that, like 5% or 3%. But they chose to get it built now, no headaches, and scratching each other's backs. They chose to use the PFI company, and so we pay massive amounts of interest. So on 150, even though the HS2 was meant to cost 50 billion, it cost us 150 billion in writing, and on top of that, after paying interest, it's cost us nearly $1 trillion. Let's call it $1 trillion. It's cost us $1 trillion, and all this is paid by the taxpayers' money, and my money, and your kids' money, right? And this is how they're negotiating these contracts, right? And the people who are authorising these contracts work for the Treasury, yeah? They're saying, yeah, these PFI is perfect, it's excellent. But the guys who are saying this PFI is perfect, it's excellent, are in and out of the Treasury. So they work for big accounting firms like Deloitte and Ernst & Young, E&Y, yeah. And they know that they've got investors abroad to invest in this PFI deal, and they get massive kickbacks for getting these investors to invest this 150 billion, right? They raise loans from their investors, and who are their investors? The offshore companies, offshore companies, drug money, drug trust funds and all that owned by their clients. So Deloitte's got clients who own these trust funds, yeah, and they go, listen, what we're going to do is we're going to come for you for £150 billion loan, yeah, to a load of people, a load of trust funds, dodgy money, yeah, and we're going to get you 15% interest, or maybe 10%, we'll keep the other 15% interest on all the loans that are taken. And these guys say, yeah, why not? We've got 500 billion in our account. It's out there doing nothing. Why not make 15% profit on it, or 10% profit on it, while it's doing jack shit? We'll only lend out 150 billion of it, out of our 500 billion, and not only have we made loads of money from drugs and arms deals, but we're going to make a shed load of money legitimately off the British government, off the British citizens. So they're going to take our money, our taxes, and build Crossrail in HS2, inflate the price, yeah, and then inflate the price and claim interest over the next 25 years. And it's written in stone. But so not only do they get that, so they use these, Deloitte will use these offshore companies in order to raise 150 billion as backing to get loans from other organisations, yeah. And the other organisations might say, oh, Crossrail, well, it could blow up in price, it might not get done, we've got a war coming on in China, let's say, there's COVID and all that, you might default on paying the loans back, right? So they charge a certain rate for the money. But once HS2 gets kind of finished in, let's say, 4 years' time, yeah, all these people who've loaned them money, yeah, these other banks and other offshore trusts that's loaned them money, they can go to these people and say, look, HS2 is running, it's making us shed loads of money, yeah, it's cutting down this cost and that cost, and they might even charge to use it. Well, they will charge for the trains, right? We want to, because you can see that it's working, it's up and running, it's stable, it's reliable, and it's done, yeah, we want to negotiate our loans, or else we're just going to pay a little fee and write them off and get them elsewhere. And so the company then says, alright, we'll let you renegotiate your loan, right? So now, rather than paying 15% to these offshore companies, the company's saying they've got the loan down to like 5%, which is saving them, let's say, 200 million per year, because they've cut the costs. But the PFI deal that the government's paying them back is fixed. So the fact that they've just renegotiated and got the deal and saved 200 million a year, that just goes straight in the pockets of all involved. Deloitte, the offshore company guys, you know, guys who raise the funds, so everyone starts making loads and loads of money. And all this is taxpayers' money. Yeah, all this is taxpayers' money, and it goes straight into the pockets. So these PFIs are a way of governments using offshore dirty money in order to rob more of our taxes from the people. Seriously. To take the taxes from the people and stuff it in their pockets and the offshore guys' pockets and the accountancy pockets. They're filling the pockets like crazy. And if they need to hide this money, let me tell you this now, do you really think the guy who's won the contract for concreting in HS2 or Crossrail, all the concreting contracts, do you really think that guy was chosen based solely on him offering the best price or being the best company for the job? No. We're talking about billions of pounds here. Billions. Yeah? And it's nothing. If you're going to give my company 6 billion for concrete over the term building Crossrail in HS2, I'm quite happy to put about 25 million, fuck all, into an offshore trust for you. And nobody can find out who owns that offshore trust, because it's a trust set up by people like David Cameron or Boris Johnson, yeah, He might have set it up in the Cayman Islands, but it's the only people who knows that he owns the account are the person who set up the trust, who is another public school boy. Yeah, and then they put other people down like Mick and Jan as beneficiaries of this trust. Mick and Jan never draw anything out from this trust, and if they do what Boris tells them to. And Mick and Jan never say a word about who owns this trust. And that's how trust funds work. It hides Boris and his kickbacks away from everything else. And not only that, but this trust can then be used to buy shares in, let's say, Apple, or to buy shares in a company that Boris and the City Boys have all discussed is going to go massive over the next 12 months. Insider dealing. They can use, Boris, let's say, can use that trust, his 25 million in that trust, to buy shares in widget.com that he knows, as a matter of fact, is going to blow up. Yeah? They buy shares in widget, £25 million worth of shares in widget.com. They go to £50 million and he doesn't have to pay tax on it because widget.com is in an offshore jurisdiction that's tax-free on capital gains and inheritance tax. Yeah? We don't know who owns it. This is how the country works. There's a dodgy city. Britain is a financial institution and it's run by public school boys who are all in this network of offshore funds, offshore arrangers, accountants, investment bankers and money managers, and that's what the UK is. And so when you're running around, you idiots, and they're telling you that Britain needs to leave the European Union because we want our borders back and we want our fisheries back. Fisheries is like £1 billion or 0.2%, probably 0.2% of our GDP, and you're signing that form and ticking away, boom, we want our fisheries back, we want our borders back, yeah? When the reality of it is, the only reason for Brexit is because Europe has decided that it wants a cut of our banking facilities, and it wants to bring all the British Isles, the Cayman Isles, Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, Virgin Islands. It wants to bring all the activities and all of that into Europe. So it's properly part of Europe. And Britain is saying, And so what the European Union done is it made a new tax directive in 2016 that said from now on you have to show us the account holders of all your accounts, offshore, onshore, whatever, and they have to pay tax on all their capital, right? And that's when David Cameron went to them, and David Cameron asked them this one question: we will do that, we will show you the owners of all bank accounts, offshore, onshore, yeah, but you must leave the privacy and secrecy of the trusts in order. It still remains private. Trust funds, we just asked for trusts to be exempt from that law, from the new European tax directives law, and Europe said no. Nope. We want to see who owns these trusts as well. And that's when Brexit was brought onto the horizon. Before then, nobody in Britain ever really complained that much. They did about a few workmen, labourers did, about Polish coming into London, but nobody in Britain ever even questioned our European membership, right? And that was put straight on the cards. We need to stop this European membership because it gives Europe an opening into all our trust funds, all our offshore facilities, which in the whole world has got £57 trillion worth dollars in. 57 trillion. We control that, half of that. Britain on its British Isles, offshore territories, and 3 crown domains. We control half of that, half of 57. Call it 30 billion. We control 30 trillion pounds worth of offshore money, and we don't want to open up all those dealings to the rest of Europe. 30 trillion. Think about it. That's a big ass motherfucking figure. Yeah? And we would have to open all that up to Europe. All of it, trusts included. So suddenly we push for Brexit, right? It wasn't, the feeling amongst Britain wasn't very strong. We would have lost, Brexit would have lost, right? So what happens next? They get in touch with the media moguls. They dominate the whole media, and they get all the relevant, influential people out, like Boris Johnson. We want our, and Dominic Cummings is the key, we want our borders back. We want our bloody borders back from all these fucking packies and niggers and who don't even come from, Europe. Yeah? That's what they're saying. This is who they were backing up. I'm half black, me, right? But that's who we were getting against, us guys. Yeah? When really Europeans are white, right? They said we want our borders back, we want our fisheries back, even though fisheries is a tiny minuscule event. Europe have got us at their beck and call. They're making all our laws, even though the truth is we were one of the, if not the second most influential body in making all the European laws. Us, British, the UK. We sat at the top table and we dictated what was going on with all these laws. It's just occasionally we didn't have as much influence as we liked. Right? They spread it to all you guys, all of you, and you all signed and ticked the box that we want a Brexit, and they said little slogans, let's take our borders back. Out means out. Brexit means Brexit. What does that even mean? Brexit means Brexit. You know, we want our country back, and they fed people with this idea of British imperialism. And British imperialism does exist, but it's not for you or for me. It's for the banks. They've got a second economy. British imperialism. They've got a second economy running all the way, spanning the whole globe, and that's in offshore jurisdictions and crime. And you don't believe this. Most people don't believe this. Yeah? And eventually you tick the box and just got us out of Europe. And so now, what's happening is Britain is going to maintain its position as being the world's world's largest money laundering, account arranging, money shifting capital of the entire planet, and we maintain that, and that is why we've left, so that the bankers in England can get richer, so that Deloitte and Ernst & Young, all the accountancy firms can get richer, so the public school boys who work in the financial district, the city, the square mile, shifting around, buying foreign exchange and selling foreign exchange, company mergers, selling them, arranging PFI agreements for our country's infrastructure that's paid for by us, they're going to get a hell of a lot wealthier. But prices are going to go up on everything, and standards are going to go down on everything like food, medicine, stuff like that, because we're not part of Europe, who generally, when they work together, Europe, they generally come out with pretty high standards on everything. They have a high standard of food toxicity. They don't like too much of this chemical or that chemical in the food. They have a high standard on medicines. They want to have this much trial, that much trial, you know, more so than say America. Yeah, they have a high standard on health and safety. Yeah, they have high standards in general as a whole, Europe as a whole, and they're implemented and thrown out to the whole of Europe. But we're out of that now, so we'll be eating toxic food. Yeah, we'll be paying, inflation will go through the roof, and they'll lie to us about how they need to tax us more. Like they'll say stuff like this: what we want to do in order to pay for this COVID crisis and Brexit, yeah, is we're going to have to increase capital gains tax to 50% or 55%. And that means that if you have a second house and you sell it and make £100,000 profit, you'll have to give £50,000 in tax. Yeah? But you'll say, yeah, but all the rich people, they own second properties as well. All the governments, they own second properties. Yeah, they do. But the fact is, their second properties are owned by a trust fund in an offshore company. So they're paying no tax. It gets handed over to their kids, it gets passed around. They buy other properties with their trust funds offshore, and they don't pay any tax. So what they're really saying is we're going to increase capital gains tax for you, the public, only. We're going to increase tax on your wages to 25% or something. You, the public, because they don't pay that kind of tax. They have accountants to sort out their tax records, and they write off a lot of this and that and the other, right? And basically they're just making England the most attractive place for all global financial issues in the whole world. And companies like Apple and YouTube and Facebook and all that will be willing to do business here because they know they can negotiate their taxes with us. What they'll do is they'll set up a company offshore so they get the stuff tax free. Then the government will go up to them and say, listen, you're getting everything tax free and you've done £17 billion worth of business in Britain this year. Yeah, you've made £17 billion worth of profit off the UK this year. So the people are screaming out, can you just throw them a bone? So they'll say, right, we'll agree to pay 500 million in taxes, and the government will say that's fine. See you later. So they've made 17 billion, yeah, and they've paid 500 million, or even 30 million, 50 million, right? Which is like a tiny percent, 1% tax, and the government will accept that because they're processing their accounts in the Cayman Islands, in the Isle of Man. And the people who are processing all their accounts, which are the public school boys, they're getting massive, and the mergers, the mergers and acquisitions. When Microsoft decides to buy this other company that's made this little widget in computing, they'll get the deal to do it. And so that company will be sold for, let's say, 50 million, and the company that arranged the selling of it will get 3 million. And that 3 million will work its way down to the broker that arranged it, the public school boy, and he'll get 200 grand added to his bonus. It all goes around, you don't understand. All they're doing is looking after the cells, and regardless of what you think or what you believe, England is owned by the public school boys network, the old school network. The posh aristocrats are running rampant, and you're paying for it. My philosophy is, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to be straight up honest with you. I want to in some way get involved in this offshore dodginess. I haven't got the money to put in an offshore account. I don't want to do that, but I want to start pointing people in the right direction to get it done for them, and I want my cut. You can't beat these guys, and this is the way we've gone now. No matter what you do in England, you're going to be struggling unless you're lucky and have property already. You're going to be struggling for the future. So I'm intending to get involved one way or another in some kind of deal manipulation. Not deal manipulation, deal arrangement. I want to be the man in the middle. I want to be the man in the middle, sat sorting this guy with Deloitte, who's bringing in loads of fucking drug money or whatever, and sell it, and they're doing accounts, and he's doing mergers and acquisitions and getting involved in PFI and loans to the British people. I want to somehow get myself sandwiched right in the middle of something like that that's going on, and I want my cut because I'm fed up with struggling and I know what's going on. Anyway, that's it.